Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Ulysses S. Grant, Part 3, Happy Marriage and Family Life with Julia Dent Grant. We stopped last time in 1861. Ulysses and his wife Julia had a very good marriage. They really loved each other. They loved their children. And even though they moved around a lot because of Grant's military career and then trying to make a living, and during the Civil War, they kept their marriage was good, was very loving, and they loved their children. Now, Grant had been out of the Army for some time, struggling to make a living, but in 1861, the U.S. Civil War was about to start, and his date with destiny was arriving, where he would play this very critical role in the Union winning the war and keeping the United States one country. In January of 1861, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana seceded from the Union. They seized the federal forts and arsenals in their states. On February 18th, Jefferson Davis was inaugurated as President of the Confederate States of America in Montgomery, Alabama. This country that was being formed by southern states and was trying to become independent. And Davis said that those who opposed the Confederacy would, quote, smell southern powder and feel southern steel. On April 12th was the firing on Fort Sumter, South Carolina, and the Civil War was on. Robert E. Lee was typical of Southern officers. He opposed secession but was loyal to his native state of Virginia. Ulysses S. Grant was almost 39 years old and ready to fight. He cast off his lethargy and depression and was energized by the situation. He had military skills, war experience, and he was loyal to the Union. Julia said about Ulysses S. Grant, quote, that he could, quote, no more resist the sound of a fife or a drum or a chance to fire a gun than a woman can resist bonnets. There was a loss of Southern officers who sided with the Confederacy, a vacuum of military leadership in the Union Army, and this meant opportunity for Ulysses S. Grant. Historian Ron Chernow wrote, quote, the time had come for Ulysses S. Grant to wash his hands of the retail job he detested, and he never again set foot in the hated leather goods store. There was a gathering in Galena, Illinois, encouraging enlistments in the Union Army, and at that gathering, Ulysses S. Grant gave a speech and said, quote, the Army is not a picnicking party, nor is it an excursion. You will have hard fare. You may be obliged to sleep on the ground after long marches in the rain and snow. Many of the orders of your superiors will seem to you unjust, and yet they must be borne. Grant wrote a letter to his father-in-law, Colonel Dent, and wrote, quote, now is the time, particularly in the border slave states, for men to prove their love of country. I know it is hard for men to apparently work with the Republican Party, but now all party distinctions should be lost sight of, and every true patriot before maintaining the integrity of the glorious old Stars and Stripes, the Constitution, and the Union. Now, Julia's father, Colonel Dent, supported the Confederacy the whole war, so you can see this family conflict. On April 2nd, Grant wrote a letter to his father and telling him that he was leaving the leather goods store and joining the Army, and he wrote, quote, we have a government and laws and a flag, and they must all be sustained. There are but two parties now, traitors and patriots, and I want hereafter to be ranked with the latter. Grant believed it would not be a short, easy war. He said, quote, I think this is a bigger thing than you suppose. Those fellows mean fight, and Uncle Sam has a heavy job on his hands. In Galena, Grant led an inexperienced local company of farm boys, clerks, and mechanics, whom he broke into squads and taught marching. He felt alive and enthused. On April 25th, those Galena soldiers traveled to Springfield, Illinois to be assigned to regiments, and Grant came with them on the train. There were big crowds in each town supporting the troops. Grant was looking for a regimental command. There was war fever in Springfield, Illinois, the capital of the state, and he wanted to see Illinois Governor Richard Yates. There was a fear that Missouri would join the Confederacy and block Illinois farm products on the Mississippi River. Yates had no position for Grant. Grant did not dress well and made a poor impression. He did not have Napoleonic ambition. Ulysses S. Grant hoped to have a modest position heading a regiment. He was not political. He was not able to play political games. Yates offered Grant as a position as adjutant general on a staff in which he would be involved with tedious administration tasks. Grant did not take that position. He got a break when his military friend John Pope, who was in command of Camp Yates on the outskirts of Springfield, Grant was given temporary command for 4 days. And Pope gave Grant the job to raise 10 regiments in Mattoon, Belleville, in Anna, Illinois. Grant visited Colonel Dent in St. Louis to discuss arrangements for Julia and the 4 children during the war. The Dent household was in an uproar as the Civil War was starting, and Ulysses and Colonel Dent argued about the war. The first year of the war, many of the Whitehaven slaves there who were owned by Julia's family escaped. Grant and Colonel Dent were on opposite sides throughout the war. In St. Louis, there were 2 armed camps of Northern and Southern sympathizers, but fortunately the St. Louis arsenal was saved for the Union. Grant returned to Springfield, Illinois. He mustered troops from Mattoon for the 21st Illinois Infantry. He impressed those troops because of his competence, and they called the camp Camp Grant in his honor. However, he was still looking for a good army position, which he had not yet acquired, and he was dejected and returned to Galena, Illinois. In May of 1861, the Confederate capital moved to Richmond, Virginia, not far from Washington. Washington was insecure, and Virginia became the center of the fighting throughout the war. In May of 1861, Grant visited his parents in Covington, Kentucky. He was looking for General George McClellan in Cincinnati. He was looking for a position. He was unable to see McClellan, who probably had a bad attitude about Grant because of his experience with him in the Army when Grant got drunk. Grant went to Columbus to see a friend of Governor William Dennison. He hoped to get a contract baking bread for the soldiers. On June 16th, he received a telegram from Governor Yates that regarding the 21st Illinois Regiment. This was a big break, and Grant was called to replace Colonel Simon S. Good, who was a drunk and incompetent commander. The men of the 21st Illinois Regiment requested Grant to be their new commanding officer. So this was a big break. Grant was fair and competent, never had a temper tantrum, no theatrics, very level-headed. With this new command, Ulysses was energized, alert, and self-confident. With his regiment, he was able to create order out of chaos with quiet discipline in 10 days. The number of the men in the regiment was raised from 630 to 1,000. Ulysses asked his father for money to buy a horse and a dress uniform appropriate for his rank. Grant allowed no alcohol in the camp. He was strict but never angry. He smashed liquor barrels. He warned grocers not to sell alcohol to his men. On June 19th, Grant's soldiers were encouraged in the regiment to switch from the short-term militia to 3-year commitments of federal service. In an affirmation of Grant's leadership, all of the men agreed and signed on for 3 years of service. One soldier said, quote, "We knew we had the best commander and the best regiment in the state." Ulysses S. Grant was assigned to transport the regiment to Quincy, Illinois, in the western border of Missouri. He decided to march the men on foot and not go by train, and this would train them while they marched. He brought his son Fred along the trip. He was happy in his element, and this was effective, training the troops by having them march. Grant wrote a letter to his wife Julia and wrote, quote, "I have been very strict with them, and the men seem to like it." Grant was unruffled. He had candor and was charitable, always cheerful, and not depressed by toil, cold, heat, hunger, fatigue, and a lack of money. The regimental chaplain, James L. Crane, wrote about Ulysses S. Grant, quote, "He has no desire to rise by the fall of others, no glorying over another's abasement, no exulting over another's tears." Grant hated slavery. On July 4th, the regiment was at the Jacksonville Fairgrounds, and Grant expected the canteens for whiskey. He received orders from General John Pope to rescue an Illinois regiment which was pinned by rebels in Palmyra, Missouri. Before he went to Palmyra, those Union troops came to Grant in Quincy, Illinois, so there was no fighting there. Grant wrote, quote, "I am inclined to think both sides got frightened and ran away." Grant became a master of the psychology of war. He had an intuitive understanding of the enemy's weakness. He understood the enemy's fears and their anxiety and did not blow up the enemy to be powerful bugaboos. He knew they were just as scared and tired as his troops were. On July 20th, Grant and the regiment traveled by train toward Mexico, Missouri. On July 21st, the Battle of Bull Run, Manassas Junction, Virginia took place. It looked like a certain Union victory, but it became a panicky rout of Union forces and a Confederate victory. Confidence in a short war for the Union was shattered. Grant and his regiment arrived in Mexico, Missouri. Now, Missouri was divided, very much divided, and Grant feared guerrilla war in Missouri. Grant was given command of 3 infantry regiments and 1 section of artillery. Ulysses S. Grant was working hard to stop troops from stealing food and drink from local residents. In August, he was given the position of brigadier general. This was a dreamlike transformation from a store clerk to command of 4 regiments and 4,000 men. In Galena, Illinois, Julia was happy and told everyone the news of his promotion. On August 8th, Grant was given command of the military district in Ironton, 70 miles south of St. Louis, which was threatened by Confederate troops under General William J. Hardee. Grant led with force of personality, not with gold braid and ribbons. Alcohol abuse was widespread, and Grant shut down the saloons in Ironton. On August 10th, there was a Confederate victory at Wilson's Creek in southwestern Missouri. Union General Nathaniel Lyon was killed. He was the first Union general killed in the war. Grant wanted to go to Virginia, where the main theater was, but there were opportunities in the West. John C. Fremont was given command of the Western Department, he replaced Grant with Benjamin M. Prentiss. And Grant went to St. Louis to see Fremont. He was depressed. John Fremont was monarchical, and Fremont assigned Grant command in Jefferson City, the capital of Missouri. There were shortages of ammunition, weapons, blankets, tents, and clothing. After a week, he was relieved of that position. Then he went to St. Louis. There was a meeting of generals to discuss how to fight Confederate activity on the Mississippi River and which general would do that. Fremont chose Grant, and Grant, because of Grant's good character, because he was humble, persistent, and had a strong will. Grant was given command of southeastern Missouri. He proceeded to Cape Girardeau, Mississippi, on the Mississippi River in southeastern Missouri. There was fighting against the Confederate forces who were from Kentucky and Tennessee. His salary was $4,000, which was good pay. At that time, General Fremont declared martial law in Missouri. Grant's son, Fred, was with him. As the battle loomed, and when they crossed into Missouri, he sent Fred home. And Julia wrote to him, quote, "Do not send him home. Alexander the Great was not older when he accompanied Philip. Do keep him with you." That's a nice reference from Alexander the Great and Philip of Macedon. Grant's mission was to fight the Confederate General M. Jeff Thompson in the swamps of southeastern Missouri. Grant made his headquarters in Cairo, Illinois, the tip of southern Illinois where the Ohio River flows into the Mississippi River. He had his office on the second floor of a bank building. Grant had unusual concentration. He could accomplish without pomp and frippery. He was quiet. He had a fleet of gunboats available for him. Now, Cairo, Illinois was flooded, hellish. There were insects, mosquitoes, dead horses, and mules floating down the river. In Cairo, there was malaria and dysentery. Grant was battling mercenary contracts who were swindling the government. He needed aides to help organize his papers because he was disorganized. And John Rawlins was brought in to manage his office and become chief of staff. Rawlins' wife had died in August, and he was grieving. He arrived in Cairo September 14th and was a huge, a tremendous help for Ulysses S. Grant. And he was also a one-man crusade to keep Grant sober. John Rawlins was dedicated to keep Grant sober, and he became indispensable to Ulysses S. Grant. Now, when Julia was absent, there was a temptation to drink. When she was around, he didn't drink. John Rawlins became Ulysses S. Grant's closest friend. Rawlins would become upset if anyone disrespected Grant. Ulysses S. Grant said, quote, "Oh, Rawlins, what's the use in getting excited over a little thing like that? It doesn't hurt me and may make the other fellow feel good." Rawlins helped Grant organize his files and papers. Secretary of the Treasury, Salmon Chase, said that Ulysses S. Grant in Cairo, Illinois was, quote, "doing wonders in bringing order out of chaos." John Rawlins was a big help. The Confederacy had invaded Kentucky under First General Leonidas Polk, who had been an Episcopal bishop before the war. In Columbus, Kentucky, became an important Confederate fortress on the Mississippi River. But the Kentucky reaction was anti-Confederacy. They wanted to remain silent and didn't appreciate the Confederate invasion of their state. In September, the Confederates planned to attack Paducah in Kentucky, 45 miles northeast of Cairo, the juncture of the Ohio and Tennessee rivers. Grant decided to take Paducah on the Ohio River with 2 regiments of artillery and a battery on steamers, 2 gunboats, and Paducah was taken without a shot. The people there were frightened of Union troops. Grant issued a proclamation to pacify the people, and he wrote that the Union troops were their friends and not the enemy. In the proclamation to the people of Paducah, Kentucky, Ulysses S. Grant wrote, quote, "I have come among you not as an enemy, but as your friend and fellow citizen, not to injure or annoy you, but to respect the rights and to defend and enforce the rights of all loyal citizens. An enemy in rebellion against our common government has taken possession of and planted its guns upon the soil of Kentucky and fired upon our flag. He is moving upon your city. I am here to defend you against this enemy and to assert and maintain the authority and sovereignty of your government and mine." President Lincoln saw this proclamation that Grant had issued there, and his response was, quote, "The modesty and brevity of that address shows that the officer issuing it understands the situation and is a proper man to command there at this time." After Grant took Paducah, Kentucky, his wife, Julia, who had become an ardent Unionist, said, quote, "It is dreadful why this mania for secession seems to be epidemic throughout the South." Grant wanted to take Columbus, Kentucky, but he needed approval from General Fremont, who did not respond to his request. On September 13th, Grant received the news that his brother Simpson had died of tuberculosis. His father Jesse sent Grant Simpson's watch, and Grant wrote, quote, "I want to preserve it to the last day of my life, and I want my children to do the same thing, in remembrance of poor Simp, who carried it in his lifetime." In late October, Union General Fremont was facing Confederate General Sterling Price in Missouri. Grant decided to attack Belmont, Missouri. Grant was the most self-confident Union commander. It was nice to wipe away the stigma of failure in his life. By this time, he had 5 regiments, 3,000 men, 4 transports on the Mississippi River, and he believed a battle would revitalize his men. At the Battle of Belmont, Missouri, Grant was cool-headed and composed. He shared the risks of war with his men and inspired them by his presence. In Belmont, the Confederate camp, they had been attacked and taken. However, the Union troops exulted and they were looting and not pursuing the Confederate troops. The Confederate troops returned an attack, and then the Union troops were terrorized and retreated and returned to Cairo. Later, the Confederates abandoned Belmont, and after this, the Confederacy were out of southeastern Missouri, and there were more Confederate casualties at that battle. After the Battle of Belmont, Memphis was in mourning. The largest hotel had been turned into a hospital. It was considered a Union victory. Grant was for the first time was mentioned in the national press. He was described as bold, impetuous, and having coolness under fire. Grant's doubts about himself were gone. During the battle at Belmont, Julia, at the same time, saw an apparition of Grant, and he asked Julia and the children to come to Cairo, Illinois. When he got there, she told him about this apparition, and Grant said, quote, that at the time of the battle, he was thinking of Julia and the children and what would happen to them if he died. Grant had a long, square-bottomed beard, and Julia asked him to trim it. Julia was very proud of her husband. There was no battles at this time. Grant was fighting corruption and disloyalty along the lower Mississippi River. Steamboats were helping the Confederacy. His father, Jesse, wanted to use Grant's position to get a government contract and job for a friend. Grant said no. He was fighting the trade between northern merchants and southern suppliers, the cotton trade along the Mississippi. He wanted to stop north-south business on the Mississippi River. November of 1861, General Henry Halleck became the commander of the Department of Missouri, including western Kentucky and Arkansas. Halleck had translated a 4-volume biography of Napoleon Bonaparte from French into English. Halleck was a by-the-book general. He lacked Grant's instinct for fighting. He was a paper pusher who ducked tough decisions in the field. Grant feared that Halleck would remove him. Grant continued to fight government contract profiteering and overcharging of the government. He wanted competitive bidding for government contracts. Grant's honesty created business enemies. Captain William J. Kuntz was a corrupt contractor. On January 14, 1862, Grant ordered him arrested, and Kuntz responded by accusing Grant of drunkenness. After the Battle of Belmont, Grant met with Confederate leaders on a steamship and under a flag for truce, and burial arrangements of dead soldiers was made. Backing up a little bit, December 23rd, Grant was given command of the district around Cairo, southern Illinois, southern Missouri, western Kentucky. He was given command of more men than General Winfield Scott ever commanded. Ulysses S. Grant had a passion to plan battles. His command included the mouths of the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers in northwestern Tennessee. He was coordinating with the Navy along those rivers, and this involved cooperation with Flag Officer Andrew Hull supervising a gunboat flotilla. The Tennessee and Cumberland rivers were the soft underbelly of the Confederacy and defense of Tennessee. The Tennessee and Cumberland rivers were parallel and had twin fortresses, Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. Fort Henry on the Tennessee River and Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. And Grant was planning to take those forts and invade Tennessee in January. General Charles F. Smith suggested that Grant attack Fort Henry, and Grant agreed. He had 2 ironclad gunboats to use. On January 6th, Grant requested permission to travel to St. Louis, Missouri, to see General Henry Halleck to discuss his plans to take these forts, Henry and Donelson. Grant proposed 24,000 men to attack. On January 23rd, Grant saw Halleck, and Halleck rejected his proposal. Grant was disappointed and returned to Cairo. He sent a telegram to Halleck asking him again if he could take Fort Henry, and on January 30th, General Halleck agreed. Abraham Lincoln said to General Halleck and General Buell, "Delay is ruining us." President Lincoln, at this time, to Quartermaster General Montgomery Meigs, quote, "General, what shall I do? The people are impatient. The bottom is out of the tub." Secretary of War Stanton said, quote, "This army has got to fight or run away. The champagne and oysters on the Potomac River must be stopped." Ulysses S. Grant was confident he could take Fort Henry with 15,000 men, 9 gunboats. General Halleck sent Lieutenant James McPherson to spy on Grant to see if he'd been drinking, and McPherson became very loyal to Grant. On February 2nd, Grant boarded the flagship in Cairo and started the Fort Henry campaign. On February 1 to 3, Grant was on the Tennessee River from Paducah, Kentucky to Fort Henry. He had 4 ironclads, 3 wooden gunboats, 23 regiments from Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. On the Tennessee River, there were mines that were very dangerous. They called them torpedoes, or infernal machines. These could blow up ships, very dangerous. However, the river was swollen. The mines were tied to the bottom of the river, which was very good luck. That meant they were out of the reach of the boats passing by. Now, the boats did receive fire. Grant was very confident that he could take Fort Henry. His strategy regarding Fort Henry, that gunboat artillery would soften the fort first before the men on land came. One of Grant's commanders was General Charles F. Smith, who had been his instructor at West Point, and Grant was his student. Grant said, quote, "It does not seem quite right for me to give General Smith orders." And Smith responded, quote, "General, I am now a subordinate." Ulysses S. Grant believed that speed and timing were more important than having every soldier in an exact position. At Fort Henry, the 7 gunboats put maximum firepower on the rebels. After an hour of fighting, the white flag was raised. Fort Henry surrendered, and the Union troops entered the fort. There were mangled bodies, arms, legs, and brains scattered about. Grant arrived at 3 p.m. This was a stunning victory, especially using the new naval technology. Grant was mild-mannered in victory, and the rebels called him modest, amiable, kind, and resolute. Well, that concludes today's presentation. Next time we'll continue with Part 4 in the life of times of Ulysses S. Grant. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.